are together back into the book of Mark. I don't know if your memory serves that we have been studying that together. We have had a little bit of a break between my being away and guest speaker, Easter, Good Friday. We've had a bit of a change. So when I originally tried to draft out the schedule for this book, I really wanted to time it. I was trying to time it so that we got to the portion of Mark right at Good Friday, when we were at the end of the book, crucifixion, and Sunday would be the resurrection, and the timing was just off enough that we're not there. We are still in the Passion Week, if you will, as we've been working through this book. We're only into chapter 12, and so we are on Wednesday of the Passion Week. On Sunday, Jesus came into Jerusalem riding on the foal of a donkey. I'm sure you are well aware of the events that took place surrounding that. People shouting Hosanna, believing him to be the king, not recognizing him to be the spiritual king of their hearts, but certainly hoping that he would be a physical king that would overrule Rome. So they celebrated Jesus as he came in. That was on Sunday. The discussion that we have this morning is taking place on Wednesday. He will be crucified on Friday. If that's any timeline to you that matters, there it is. And now you know what's going on. I've entitled what I want to say this morning, based on the little phrase that Jesus gives to the man where he was speaking to. Just call this "so close, but not yet." It is easy to be at the 1 yard line, but not over into the goal line. It is easy to hit a golf ball and come within 3 meters of that hole, but you still can't call that a hole in one, even though you think, well, it's close enough. If you're not in, you're not in. We have an expression in English, I understand it started only in 1973, which is really not that old of an idiom. Close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades. We all know that. And I'm pretty sure, if I'm not mistaken, that is the only thing that I'm aware of. Well said, that is close enough. A hand grenade being an area weapon, of course, no need for being accurate to the nth degree. And that is really the issue of the gospel and the issue of entering into the kingdom. And that is the subject that we take up today, just to remind you of some familiar verses from Matthew 7, verses 13 and 14. Jesus commends his readers, or his listeners, at the end of the Sermon on the Mount. Enter by the narrow gate. If you want to read it this way, that's a command. If you want to get into the kingdom, you must enter by the narrow gate. These are the rules. This is the instructions. For the gate is wide, the way is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter by it are many. For the gate is narrow, and the way is hard that leads to life. Find it are few. I like that phrase that Jesus adds there, that those who find it, as if to imply that in order for you to find this gate, you have to be of a heart disposition to be looking for that gate. You have to find that gate, and there are people who have found the gate who have never entered the gate. That is what this subject is about this morning. There are those people who have found the gate, they have discovered the truth, they know what it is, but they've never personally chosen to enter into that gate. And if you've not entered into the gate, you're outside the gate, you're close, but you're not yet. And you can be close, but you are so far. You can't know about this thing without entering into this thing to have this thing. What in the world am I talking about? Let me explain to you as we pull this apart, this thought out, while we jump into a discussion that Jesus had with a particular person known as a scribe. Verse 28 of Mark 12 says one of the scribes. Just to pause there, to give you a bit of background that you aren't interested in, but I'm going to share anyways. A scribe is, in Matthew, he's called a lawyer. It's not a lawyer in a legal sense of someone who would know the laws of the land. He's a lawyer in the sense that he knows the laws of God. He is a man who literally scribally wrote down the Torah, letter by hand. And this man would have had to go through studies. He would have had to been sanctioned by the church for this position. It wasn't just something you nilly-willy decided to do. He had to reach a pinnacle in his career, if you will, to be called a scribe, and he knew the scriptures inside and out. He had written them out by hand at great length over and over and over again. So he knew the Bible. By the way, this process of being a scribe was the only way that a Torah was accepted. The Torah, by the way, is the first 5 books of the Old Testament. It's for those non-Jewish people here who are confused by that phrase. The only way that those books could be legitimately accepted is if a scribe had written them down. It's not good enough for you to copy them down. In fact, even today, there are Torah writing robots who can produce a Torah at much greater speed than the human hand. However, these Torahs are not, if I can use the word, kosher, and not to be used in a synagogue because they were not written by a scribe. Here's a quote in tablemag.com. Rabbi Reuven Yakubov explained the qualifications of a kosher Torah. In order for the Torah to be holy, it has to be written with a goose feather on parchment. The process has to be filled with meaning, and I'm saying prayers while I'm writing it. You can do what you want with that. I think that's, I'll save my own personal comments to myself. Just all that to say, that is the process of a scribe. This is who this man is. So this man has come to Jesus and approached Jesus, and he has also been, throughout his career, been a part of the team, if you will, the people who are constantly bantering about what are the laws that really matter. They had decided, along with the scribes, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, that there are 613 Old Testament laws. Why 613 Old Testament laws? Because there are 613 letters, Hebrew letters, in the Ten Commandments. So they had to find one law for every letter. So they did that. They found out that there are 248 positive commands. They divided them this way. That is, you can do this, you can do this, you are to do this. And 365 negative commands. Why 365? One day for every day of the year. One command for every day of the year. 365 negative commands, thou shalt not, thou shalt not, thou shalt not. And they would argue which commands were greater, which commands were lesser. This was an ongoing debate amongst all of the scribes and Pharisees and the lawyers, if you will, the scribal lawyers who wrestled with the law. They always wanted to know these big questions. If you ate a ham sandwich by mistake, is that worse than coveting a ham sandwich your entire life but never eating one? Which is worse? And they would argue little minutiae of the law and try to work out how far can you get to disobeying the law without actually disobeying the law, and what laws are greater. And so only arguing amongst themselves. And so that's the context of what's going on. So one of the scribes, these men who's been wrestling his whole life with the law, who's got it all sorted out and divided up, he hears them disputing with one another. Who is the them? Well, Paul made quick reference to this while he read this text to us this morning, that the them takes us back into a deeper context. So if you're pretending you're still with me, I'm going to take you back to Mark chapter 12, verse 13. Let me just give you a running context here. And they sent to him some of the Pharisees and some of the Herodians. Just pause for a second. The Pharisees and the Herodians are diametrically opposed to each other in their ideologies. They want, in essence, nothing to do with each other. They are pulling for opposite teams. However, it's like the Russians and the Americans or something like that. I don't know what you want to conjure up in your head, but two diametrically opposed ideas. Enemy. And his name is Jesus. Isn't that the way? Today, to this day, it doesn't matter what world religion you hold to, there comes a point where you realize, when you recognize who Jesus is, you all have a common enemy. And he stands diametrically opposed to what the world teaches and what every world religion teaches. On the bottom line, that it's in you to do what you need to do to reach to God. In fact, he becomes a common ground to try and take down his teaching. So Pharisees, the Herodians, they come to trap him in his talk. So we know that as a reader, that this is their intention. Verse 14, and they came and said to him, Teacher, we know that you are true. Can you smell the butter right now? Can you just feel the greasy butter that they're lathering onto this guy? Can't you just smell the popcorn in the back room happening? Teacher, we know that you are true. Do not care about anyone's opinion, for you are not swayed by appearances, but truly teach the way of God. Oh, we're with you all the way. So here's our question. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Should we pay them or should we not? And without pulling out, this is another sermon in itself, This is the question posed because, again, it comes out of the law. They're trying to wrestle through all these questions. Which laws are greater? Which laws are lesser? And they've got Jesus on the hook. You know the text. If he says you shouldn't pay taxes, then the Herodians will say, aha, arrest him. That's treason. We have to support Rome. And if he says you should pay taxes, then the Pharisees say, aha, he is not putting God first. He's not paying the temple tax. Aha, we've got him both ways. So Jesus, of course, sees right through their duplicity, asks for a coin. You know the text says whose image is on the coin. And he says, render to Caesar that which is Caesar, and to God's that which is God's. And what he's saying ultimately is, if the image of God is on your heart, then you owe your life to God. The image of Caesar is on a coin, you give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. And Jesus gave them the most brilliant answer to get out of this trap. That's exactly what it was. So that didn't work. So the Sadducees come to him. The next verses, verse 18, same chapter. This is a running commentary, the running context. The Sadducees come to him, who say there is no resurrection. And they've got a question. They asked him a question saying, teacher, Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies and leaves a wife but leaves no child, the man must take the widow and raise up offspring for his brother. They come up with this convoluted story. There's 7 brothers who took a wife and he died, so the next brother takes the wife, and on, and all 7 brothers die. So whose wife is she going to be in the resurrection? In other words, what they're trying to say is, obviously the whole idea of a resurrection is foolish. And if you don't believe what Moses wrote, then clearly we've got you. Jesus very cleverly answers them, the Sadducees. Without getting into details here, I've already gotten you bored enough. The Sadducees only believe the first 5 books of the Bible, and so Jesus quotes from those books of the Bible and proves to them that, in fact, there is a resurrection. God is not the God of the dead, but of the living, and he explains that. You can read the text if you're interested, and they don't have an answer. They don't get a way to hook him. So finally, they're stumped. They're trying to trap this Jesus, and they're throwing questions at him that they have had. They're always trying to wrestle with the law themselves, and they're trying to see where this young upstart of a rabbi is at. Does he hold to the law? If we could just find a way that he makes a mistake, we could crucify him. Believe it or not, it doesn't take this to get him crucified, and clearly this doesn't work. Matthew 22, verse 34 gives us just a tiny bit of a running commentary on what we're about to read in Mark chapter 12. This is a parallel passage to what's taking place in Mark, but Matthew adds this little piece of information that Mark leaves out. When the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together. What are we going to do now? Got another idea? How are we going to get him to this time? I don't know. Then, immediately after this, comes to our verse, and one of the scribes came up and heard them disputing with one another, and seeing that he answered them well, asked him. Now this is the question that every scribe would have wrestled with. What is the greatest commandment? And now we don't know, honestly, we're not sure, is this a good guy or a bad guy? Is he trying to trap Jesus, or is he asking an honest, sincere question? We don't really know. What we do know is that when we get to the end of this conversation, Jesus says, you are not far from the kingdom of God. You are so close, but not yet. He understood, but he hasn't understood completely. We don't know where this is coming from, but here's the question. Which commandment is the most important of all? And you know his answer. Deuteronomy 6, verses 4 and 5. We read that this morning. Jesus answered, the most important is the Shema. That is what this is called. This text is read every meeting of a Jewish meeting in every synagogue. From that day to this, it is called the Shema because the Hebrew word for hear, the first word hear, H-E-A-R, hear, O Israel, is the Hebrew word Shema. This is called the Shema. And this is considered to be the quintessential apex of the Old Testament law, even to a Jewish ear. You know the words. You know this text. Memorize this as a child if you had the chance. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. Let's continue reading from Deuteronomy. This is the text. This is the text that Jesus is quoting. Verses 7 to 9. You read this morning. You shall diligently teach them to your children. You shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign in your hand. They shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. And that is exactly what the Jewish people thought was the way that you could prove your love for God. If you wanted to show your genuine devotion and love for God, then you literally had to do those things. And so, to this very day, the Jewish people get a scribe, a kosher scribe, to write out these verses on a parchment. They're very small. They roll it up, wrap it tightly, and they put it in a very small little box. You might be familiar with this, called a phylactery. And they take that phylactery and they literally strap it to their head so that this text is bound to the frontlets between their eyes. They write this text out, they bind it around their hand, they sew it into their clothing, and they pray holding on to this text because believing that the text says, do you love God with all your heart? This is what you're going to do. I'm going to prove to you I have love for God. I'm going to take his word and I'm going to strap it to my head exactly what the text says. And to this day, Jewish people have what is called a mezuzah on their houses. At least Orthodox Jews or practicing Jewish people. They take, again, this text is written by a kosher scribe, very small, rolled up parchment, put in a little cylinder, and put on their doorpost. And they will come in and they will touch it, they will kiss it, they will pray over it as they walk in and out. And that is their proof that they love God, because they have literally done what this text says. By the way, this is kind of an aside. I found this out this week in my study, so I'm not Jewish, so I could be wrong in this, but my understanding is a great majority of Jewish people to this day believe that their house is protected against all harm, no fires, no robberies, no injuries, no whatever to take place, as long as they have a mezuzah on their front porch, on their doorpost. It protects them from all harm within their house. I don't know what you do with that, but my Christian spidey sense gets kind of upset at the notion of turning that into some superstition. But alas, this is evidence that we love God. Now I ask you, is it possible to legislate love? Clearly no. You can't force somebody to love, and you can actually literally go through some formal actions that look like love, but where does love actually come from? It's a disposition of your own free will to choose to love. So Jesus uses this verse to remind the Jewish people that your love is not about your outward actions. If you want to know the greatest way to respond to God, if there was only one commandment that you had to keep, this is the commandment. If there is only one commandment that you have to know, and there are 613, and what he's saying to him is really, there's just one, and if you do this one, you will ultimately keep all the commandments. The Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. Let's take a few minutes and look at this text and just flesh this out for a few minutes, even though we're all so very familiar with it. Try to pretend this is fresh to your ears. The Lord our God, the Lord is one. What is this commandment? This is saying that there's only one God. This is where your devotion has to go. You know, sometimes we say God should be number one in your life. No, that is wrong. God should not be number one in your life, because that implies that there's a number two and a number three and a number four and a number five, and he's just number one. No, you missed this. This is claiming that God should be the only thing in your life. That's the command. That he is exclusively your only affection. Every thought, every emotive, every action, everything is captivated by a singularity of bringing glory to God. That is this command. The Lord our God, the Lord is the only supreme deity and Lord in your life. Not your television, not your, next Netflix thing you got to watch. It is not your bank account. It is not your job, your career. It is not your family. There is only one priority. No other Lord. Nothing else dominates. That's this text. That's pretty high calling. The Lord your God, the Lord is one. It's an exclusive command. It is also a command that gives us direction. You shall love. This is what we do. It's not just obtain facts. It's not just gain some knowledge. It's not make a hobby out of God. It's not show up in church once a week and do your thing. It's not fit Him into your life. It's let your life be swallowed up in Him. It is not just allow Him now and again to hear a few prayers when you get in trouble. It is not just to know a few things about God. It is not to even believe that God exists. It is not some periphery. It is all-encompassing love. This is where our affections go. And it shall be in the object of the Lord your God. It is not loving anything else. It is the object that we attend to. He is our attention. He is our consummation. He is all that we think about, live for, and dream of. That is this text. You shall love the Lord your God. He shall be the one who is the center of everything. You defend His cause. You work for His aims. And where does this come from? Does it come from outward actions? No, it comes from your inner being. You should love Him with all your heart. The Hebrew idea of your heart is different than the Greek idea, and it has to do with everything that's in you. The real you, the deep down you, the piece of you that people can't see, that if you had your arms and legs amputated, pardon me for that graphic suggestion, you would still exist because your arms and legs are not you. The real you is deeper than your flesh. It is deeper than who you are. And the real inner being, that's where this comes from. It is not an outward form. It is not me strapping something on my head. It is not me going through the motions. It is from within my depths of who I am. This is what I desire. This is what I want. And it should be with all of your soul. This is the same thing, almost said a different way. This is your emotions, your desires, your hungers, your wants. Everything within you desires to please and love God. This is the commandment, to love God with all your soul, all of your being, everything you are, and all of your mind, all of your intellect, your thought life, your decisions, your choices. Sometimes we equate our mind with our decisions. We'll make up expressions like, I made up my mind. What do we mean? We made a decision. My mind has led me to make a choice. With all of the decisions and all of your choices, they all focus on the glory of God. Not your own agenda, not your own life, not your own thoughts, not your own dreams, on God's kingdom, on God's glory. This is the commandment. It is the quintessential commandment. It is the impossible commandment. It is the commandment we all seek to attain to. And it is the commandment that ultimately proves whether you are in or out of the kingdom. With all of your mind, your thought life, your choices, and with all of your strength, now your actions and your energies, now what comes out of you. Where do you spend your money? Where do you spend your time? What do you do with your free time? How do you give, and what do you do, and what do you build, and who are you helping, and what are you doing? And all that comes out of you, all that comes out of your mouth, all that comes off of your hands, it all is a reflection of your love for God. And this is quintessentially this commandment, the greatest commandment. Loving God is an act of the will that can be legislated. If you want to know the greatest commandment, Jesus said, it comes from within you. It's not about you strapping something on your forehead. It's not about you wrapping physically something around your hand. It's not about you nailing something on your doorpost and now believing you love God because you've done these things. It is an act of your own heart. It is a choice within you that has consumed who you are. You are now gone because your love for God has swallowed you up. That is this commandment. Deuteronomy 30, verses 19 and 20. I'll just read these verses to you. Therefore, choose life, that you and your offspring may live, loving the Lord your God, obeying His voice, and holding fast to Him, for He is your life and length of days. The whole book of Deuteronomy is a constant reiteration of that truth. Loving God, putting God first, loving God with all your heart. And that little phrase just captured me this week, and I wanted to let you read it too. He is your life. To me, that just expresses it all. He's your life. You want to know what it looks like to love God? He is your life. He's all that you do. He's all that you think about. He's all that you desire. He's all that you are. You have been swallowed up. You don't fit him into your little day. You fit your day into him. You don't say, I'm going to see how I can make him, find a couple of minutes today. No. Your life is swallowed up in him. That's the commandment. Now, I'm not suggesting any one of us in this room lives up to this commandment. Isn't that exactly why we need the cross? I'm just telling you what the commandment is. And this is the commandment that Jesus is holding up before this Jewish man and telling him that it's not about your actions, it's about your heart. And is that not the gospel message? That all your outward actions will mean nothing unless your heart has been transformed to desiring to put God first in all things. You know nothing of this kingdom. I came across this week, and I wasn't sure where to stick it, so I stuck it here. Thought this was kind of interesting, so just taking a little aside. Ripley's Believe It or Not reports that Marcel Leclerc, a painter from Paris, France, wrote a very lengthy love letter. Want to see what love looks like? He wrote, Je vous aime, I love you, 1,875,000 times. This was in the year 1875, so he wrote it 1,000 times the year. He was enthralled by the sound of the words, so he dictated the letter to his scribe who wrote it and had his hired help repeat the phrase each time it was written. Thus, the phrase was repeated in oral and written form 5,625,100,000 times. The story concludes with the words, never was love made manifest by as great an expenditure of time and money. Well, that's what love looks like on a human level. Do something physically that puts you in some sort of a Ripley's Believe It or Not category, and you become world famous for doing something physical. This is not the commandment. This is not the kind of love we're talking about. This is a love that supersedes all measure of human action and all measure of human love. Mark 12:31, Jesus says this, the second greatest commandment is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There's no other commandment greater than these. By the way, Jesus is quoting Leviticus 19, verse 18, just for the sake of telling you where that comes from. He didn't make that up. You shall hate your brother, verse 17, Leviticus 19. You shall not hate your brother in your heart, but you shall reason frankly with your neighbor, lest you incur sin because of him. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against the sons of your own people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. This is the greatest commandment. This is not a commandment for you to have self-esteem, love your neighbor as you love yourself, and you should build up yourself. This is because you obviously care for yourself. Who did you feed this morning? Who did you dress this morning? I hope you got dressed this morning. Whose hair did you comb this morning? Who did you care for this morning? Who did you put to bed last night when you were tired? You care for yourself. And that is the very principle. The way that you just naturally and automatically look after yourself, that's the way we look after each other. Ultimately, I don't know if you realize this, but this is the fulfillment. These two commandments are the fulfillment of every command in the Old Testament. In fact, if you look at the 10 commandments, it becomes rather obvious that if you keep these two commandments, you keep all 10 commandments. The first 4 commandments are all related to loving God supremely and completely. No other gods, worshiping no idols, defending God's name, remembering to honor the Sabbath and keeping it holy, and remembering to put God first and God's primary and God's fundamentally in the forefront of your mind. You love him with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And the second part of the second tablet of the 10 commandments, 5 to 10, are all about your neighbor. Looking after other people and making sure that you honor your parents and you don't hate other people and murder other people, and you are careful with your relationships with others. You're not stealing from other people. You're not lying to other people. You're not coveting what other people have. It's loving your neighbor. If you keep these commandments, you keep the entire law. This is the law summed up. And this is what it means to have Christ in your heart, that Christ becomes the means by which you fulfill this law. Our failure to keep this law is satisfied in Christ because his righteousness becomes our righteousness. But he puts within every true believer a desire and a hunger to put God first, to love God supremely, to love His Word, to desire these things. And if this is not your heart, then you're close, but you're not yet. If you think that it's all about some head knowledge, and you think that it's all about some periphery of outside actions that you do, you know nothing of what Jesus is talking about. The scribe answered him. This is fascinating, because nobody has said this in the entire conversations that Jesus has with these people when he argues with them. The scribe said to him, "You are right." Nobody ever told Jesus he was right. They just stopped talking. They just hated the fact that he was right, but they never told him he was right. And this gives us some indication that maybe there's some measure of sincerity within this scribe. Maybe there's some measure of enlightenment that just happened in his own heart. And he's realizing, you're right. You're right, teacher. You truly have said that he is one, and that there is no one besides him. And to love, and then he just reiterates what Jesus said, to love him with all the heart and with all the understanding, with all the strength, and to love one's neighbor as oneself is much more than all burnt offerings and sacrifices. That's huge for a Jew to say. Not to belabor this, offerings and sacrifices, this is the common routine of the Jewish people, a daily, constant, continual, 24/7. More sacrifices, another sacrifice, another time to the temple, another burnt offering, another sacrifice, another more blood spilled, constant and continual. And to recognize, for this man to recognize that to be right with God is not about those things. Do we need them? Yes, we need a sacrifice to cover our sins. But first and foremost, it is possible for you to go through the actions of all these outward things, of offering a sacrifice, of offering a burnt offering, but your heart is not in it. It can be rote routine and religion of strapping something on your forehead and writing something on your hand and putting it on your doorpost, but your heart is vacant from the real true love of God. That's where truth begins, in the essence of who you are. And he recognized this immediately. You can't actually do those actions unless your heart is right with God. Exactly. And when Jesus saw that he answered wisely, he said to him, "You are not far from the kingdom of God." You've got it. You understand it. That it begins in your own heart, that your heart has to be transformed. That there's a transformation that needs to take place within you that puts God first, that takes yourself off the throne, that takes your own dreams off the throne, that makes you die to all that this world offers you, that you have to recognize that there is a transformation, a regeneration that has to happen within you that makes you hunger and love God. This kind of love. And if this kind of love doesn't exist within you, then you're close, but you're not in the kingdom. You can know all about this kind of thing, but you've never entered through the gate. This man could reiterate the law, and he acknowledged that Jesus was right, but at the end of the day, we have no record that he ever understood, truly understood, that he needed Christ to change his own heart, to make his heart love God before he did these things. After that, no one dared ask him any more questions. Close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades. Are you in the kingdom this morning? Do you understand the kind of love that this commandment calls us to? Do you understand that these outward actions of religion are just religion? Do you understand that unless your heart is being transformed by Christ himself and the power of Christ himself, and your love for God is genuine and real, test yourself. I mean, where are your affections? Where are your hungers? Where are your desires? What do your actions show? Is it coming from a wellspring of a love for God that Christ has put in there? Or is it you going through the motions of doing your religious thing because you think somehow it makes you a better person? I don't know, fill in the blank. That somehow it's just a thing you do. Examine your own heart. Have you entered the gate? Is there evidence that your love for God is genuine? That your love for God supersedes, and when you know that you're wrong, you know you're wrong, and you know you've had other loves, the Spirit of God has showed you you're wrong. You know this because you know Christ in you. If you don't know him in this way, I invite you to call on him this morning. I ask you to consider your own need of surrendering your own life, allowing him to swallow your life up, to give yourself up so that you love Christ and love him supremely, which is the greatest commandment. And if you break this commandment, you will stand before God knowing, with full knowledge, that you have disobeyed exactly what he's called you to do. Love him supremely. This is the gospel.